Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event from the Jesus College Intellectual Forum. It's great to have you here, whether you are in the Frankopan Hall in person or you're watching us from online. We managed to get an audience. I think we've got most countries in the world have sent somebody along. There's still a few we're trying to fill in. So if you're here from Antarctica or any of the other countries, you're particularly welcome. My name's Julian Huppert. I'm the director of the Intellectual Forum. Now, Jesus College has an amazing history. We were originally set up as a 12th century nunnery. We became a college in 1496, and it's been a place where people have reflected and thought and discussed ideas for many, many hundreds of years. We at the Intellectual Forum try to continue that tradition. We're much more recent, since 2016, but we do get people for conferences, events, and these public talks. If you've missed any of them, most of them are back on our YouTube channel, so you can watch a huge range of amazing topics. Now, there have been lots of things that we have looked at here. One of the topics has been looking at sport. We recently had one of our students, Jenna Armstrong, talking about rowing. We've had a guy called Ned Bolting, who some of you may have come across, who occasionally commentates. I'm not really sure on the details. And we've had a range of other pretty amazing people talking in those areas. But tonight I'm delighted to welcome back a really special guest. Chris Boardman has done many, many things. He has won an Olympic gold, 92 in Barcelona. Who here remembers that?
Oh, half.
Yeah, okay. Quite a number of people. Do you remember it?
I do,
but he's also played a huge role in advising on cycling and actually more broadly on active transport here in the UK. So it's the Cycling and Walking Commissioner for Active Travel England, having done many other roles in that area. He's also the chair of Sport England. He has a brand of bikes named after him. He's a visiting fellow here at Jesus College. It's wonderful to have you visiting here, and somebody who I've had the pleasure of knowing for quite a long time now as we work together on cycling and active transport policy. One of the things that's amazing about Chris is that he can not only ride a bike really fast and commentate amazingly on that and the science behind it, but on some of the broader concepts around psychology and how you persuade people to make change. So it's really wonderful to have you back here today, Chris. Thank you for being here. Over to you.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you. So that was a very nice introduction. Thank you very much. I wouldn't call it as a career as much as I just bumped into stuff and kept saying, "Can I have that?" And people said yes, and then I ended up in a wholly different place. And it's been quite an extraordinary journey so far. I think through it all, though, I would say that I am a data-driven person. Data and evidence, absolutely love it, from my time as an athlete to manufacturing, retail, working in transport, as Julian said. I love measuring things, and I love to have a hypothesis, go and test it. Wow, there's a gap. What caused the gap? What do we need to do differently? Absolutely love it. But whilst there's a spattering of evidence and data in the next few minutes, mostly this evening is about my experiences en route and my opinion. So you're going to have to decide whether you agree and how you feel about that, which is largely the point of what it is that I'm going to be covering in the next 3/4 of an hour. Because one thing that I have learned in all of that time, particularly as I've moved away from sport, is that often, frustratingly, infuriatingly, our biggest decisions are not evidence or data driven at all. So yeah, over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to share with you a little bit about the background, my journey, dealing with some of that, and creating contexts and environments where we can start to influence it and bring things together. Specifically, I want to tell you about experiences with a pen, a wind tunnel, and some local councillors. I suppose it was kind of the evolution of tactics over those times, because they actually all have something in common, before finishing up with a bit of a transport focus and throwing forward really to what next. What is it that we could do with all of that? I'll be interested to get some feedback if you think I'm on the right track or talking absolute rubbish. So the stories that I've picked, I'm going to start back when, just into my post-sport career, post-athletic career, when I was working for British Cycling as director of coaching back when tank tops were cool, because they absolutely were. I think that was a period of life when clothing was very different. And I was in charge of about 20 coaches, totally unqualified to be so, but I had 20 coaches. And it was the period running up to early 2000s when we just won the Olympic bid for 2012. And so there's quite an influx of money into the world of sport, and there was a gearing up to see if we could make sure we were successful in 2012, because we didn't. I don't know if you remember, but we used to just turn up and clap at sporting events pre-then, but boy, didn't it change at that moment. And the UK Sport, the governing body for sport at that time, had set up the elite coach program to make sure that we had the best coaching for our athletes in the run-up to those games. And it was a really expensive program. It ran over 3 years, and each cohort had an annual intake of only about 10 to 12 people, and they would have intensive live-in weeks of different experiences to make them better leaders. So I got sent on that course for reasons I haven't got time to tell you about, more stories, but I ended up on that course, and for me it was utterly life-changing. We had to come to speak to us, we had leaders of armies, psychologists, psychiatrists, musicians, hostage negotiators, a plethora of experts in their field who came and just gave us different ways to do things and to see the world. And it was during that time, and one of the things we like to do is these week-long courses is keep you off balance all of the time. So they were held all over the country. They were sometimes in posh hotels, sometimes they were in youth hostels, just really different all of the time. And this particular occasion that I was going to tell you about, we were in Largs, so up on the west coast of Scotland. This is the brochure picture of Largs. This is the reality of what Largs actually looks like. The locals said it doesn't actually stop raining there, just sometimes the raindrops get really small. So it was an interesting place, and I was there to work with a company called What If Limited, a really quirky, very, very smart group of people who tended to work with businesses when things had gone a bit stale or they were about to renew a strategy. They just wanted to bring in new thinking, new ways of doing things. And these strange people sort of looked at your world and just saw something slightly different. They were just out of tune. So they'd come to work with us on being open-minded. And we came down to our workroom in the morning, and all the furniture had gone, and there was just some bean bags on the floor and fairy lights around the walls. Never actually found out what the fairy lights were for, but there was fairy lights. And in front of us were our two presenters, Matt Freya and Angela. I can't remember Angela's second name, but Matt and Ange, we just used to call them Mange. And they were standing there barefoot, Matt with his hair everywhere, just come to work with very different people. And Matt told us a story about a pen. Now, you may have heard this story before. It's been largely defunct now, but it obviously had an impact on me, which is why I'm telling you the story. And it goes like this, that when the Americans first went into space, they were having problems with things working because of gravity and pressure differences. So they went to Fisher, the pen people, and said, we want you to make us a pen that will work in space. And so Fisher went, oh, we like the idea of that, definitely. And they went away, and a few $100,000, a couple of years later, they came back and went, here you go, this is the space pen. This is not the space pen. You're going to have to use your imagination. It's very different. My kids stole mine. This is the space pen. This works upside down. It would work underwater. You could even stab a piece of wood with it, and it keeps working. The Americans went, wow, that's great. And it worked really well, and they're very pleased with it. And a few years later, when the Cold War got slightly less cold, they found themselves in space with the Russians. And they went, look at our pen. This is the space pen. This works upside down. It would work underwater. You could even stab wood with it. It keeps going. And the Russians went, wow, we use a pencil. And that story really scared me. It really scared me, and because it made me realize just how you can confine people's thinking with the wrong question. So imagine if they hadn't even gone to Fisher, they'd sat there and said, how can we record information in space? And suddenly they've engaged a lot more imaginations. They would have got more people involved in the outcome, and it could have been a completely different result. So I heard this story and I thought, well, I've got an ego and I really like winning things and I like to come up with the best answer. I want to get the pat on the head, isn't he clever? And that's not going away. So how do I manage it? So I had to change how I won. And I chose to change, from that moment forward, change the way I led teams by giving myself permission to not have to have the best answer. And my job, my winning, was going to be coming up with the best question in the room. And I had a group of coaches, so I went and tested it with them. And I found it was not only effective when they were in charge of their own destiny, they were able to think properly and they could think it through. It was a lot easier for me as well. And I could sit there doing this and people would think you were great. It was amazing. So I just changed to asking the best question, but the quality of that question and its intent is also really important. I don't know if anybody's read The Chimp Paradox by Steve Peters. So I was Steve Peters, clinical psychiatrist. We worked at British Cycling at the same time, so I was around when it was being written. And it's very old psychology. It's really simple stuff, pamphlet size, but it's brilliant in its simplicity, the way it looks at human beings. And it says, basically, in this skin, there is you, human, and there is the chimp. And the chimp is very powerful, and it doesn't speak English. And anything that represents a threat, you will be pushed out of the way. The chimp is at the front because it's going to control things and make sure that you are safe. And so that's come with us as we've evolved, and our threats look slightly differently now. So if somebody's asking you questions that can give a yes or no answer and they're quite closed, then the chimp often spots the threat here. I'm being manipulated, jumps to the front, and it doesn't work. So the questions have got to be really open. They've got to allow the person you're with to explore. And so the two that have accompanied me for the last 15 years or so is, what does success look like? Sounds very simple, but what does success look like? And that's not something that works for everybody, that no one can object to. It's got to be some detail in there. What does success look like? So everybody knows what they're trying to achieve. And the second one, which is just as important, what must be true for that to happen? Not what would be helpful, what would we like, in my opinion. What must be true? Without that thing, there is no change. Those two questions, if you ask them, that second one, if you follow it all the way to conclusion, it takes you to some incredible places. So I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So back to the world of sport. It's a place of both stress and clarity. What does success look like? It's gold medals. It's nice and simple. It's brutal. It's gold medals. What must be true for a cycling team in particular to get a gold medal? I must be faster than the other people. What must be true to be faster than the other people? I must be more powerful, or I must be more efficient, which is pretty much what it boiled down to for us. Now, if you take an athlete, a really good athlete who's on a national team at that level, and you give them even better coaching, you might squeeze 1% more out. But efficiency, that is where the potential prize lies, particularly in the world of cycling. So I found myself during this period, we were just reviewing the last Olympic cycle. I think we'd won one gold medal in those days. That was a big deal. And I was with Dave Brailsford, Sir Dave Brailsford now, and we were just in Starbucks coffee house in Piccadilly Station, just picking over everything that had gone before. And Dave said, coaching, we're getting on top of that now. We've got better tactical insight. We've got ex-German coach who's come to work with us. What about all the other stuff? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there's helmets and there's clothing and there's bikes and there's all that other stuff. What about the other stuff? And so it was in that coffee shop that I became head of stuff for British Cycling, which later became massaged to be the aggregation of marginal gains. It sounded a lot better when we polished it in retrospect. But essentially, it was go and look at all of your stuff, work out how you can improve every bit of it, or hundreds of things by a tiny amount, and then amass it into a meaningful difference, which is what we did. So I'm going to have to skip through this. I assembled a really eclectic group of people to come and work and look at all of our stuff. One of them was from the motorsport world, a guy called Rob Lewis, who was an aerodynamicist. We had Sally Cowan, who was from the underwear industry, because she knew all about textiles. We had a guy called Dimitris Katsanis, who was a composites expert, who was busy making bulletproof seats for helicopters. So lots of people with very different experiences that were obviously related, but a lot of ignorance mixed in as well. And that ignorance was amazing because they had knowledge we didn't know about, and they asked the bleeding obvious questions, like, why are your handlebars 42 centimeters wide? Don't really know. Would you use 38 centimeter handlebars? Would we? Yes. How about 27? No. Why not? I don't know. And they just brought a whole new way of thinking about things. And some of that thinking was, to them, bread and butter. So Rob Lewis came along and said, well, we use computational fluid dynamics, CFD. Bear in mind, this was around 20 years ago. We use computational fluid dynamics to do a lot of modeling, so we know which track to start to work with. So if we do that for Formula One cars and for motorsports, why can't we take a cyclist, laser scan them, and do the same thing with them? And that's exactly what we did. We took some of our best athletes, we did that, and we started to model, and we could do things like have positioning sessions without the athlete even being present. We could model the aerodynamics of a single stitch of clothing, and then bring all that together into a whole package and watch how they interact. And it was quite an incredible period where we found not marginal gains by any means. It was absolutely huge gains. In the first Olympic cycle, this team came together and I think it was about 10,000 tests and experiments that we produced, that we conducted, that led to 86 brand new designs, and then the production of 1,763 pieces of equipment and clothing that we delivered, if not on time, then at least if not on time, at least in time for the what would be the most successful Olympic team of all time, for a performance advantage of an average of 6% across the board. We took the data that we found on computers. We went to work. We based ourselves in Southampton University, the Wolfson unit, because 90% of the energy we produce is pushing air out the way as a cyclist, so it's natural we'd end up, that was our base. And to verify all of that modeling, we got just one or two athletes. That's Rebecca Romero, gold medalist in 2008. Jason Quealy was also a gold medalist in the kilometer event. We took his laser scan and made a model. We made Jason's brother so we could do things without him even being there. And that was our cracking little team who found those amazingly massive differences. And I nearly blew all of that because I didn't know at the time that data wasn't enough. So we had our first Olympic cycle, and the next two cycles followed the same pattern, but we would do 1 year of complete blue sky thinking, and we tested fair, sequins, all sorts of weirdness for materials. We went, just explored. And then in the second year, we would do some honed experiments, and then third year, we would take those prototypes and start to make them into potential possibilities, hone it down, and then at 3.5 years to go, we just went hell for leather with production. And that's what we did in our first Olympic cycle. And then I took all of this stuff that we'd created, the clothing and the helmets, bits of bicycle, and went to the first qualifying event for the Olympics. And no one's even in the Olympics yet. You have to qualify through World Cup events. And this one was in Apeldoorn in the Netherlands. And I went along and distributed all of this stuff out of our container to all of the athletes and the coaches who were really stressed here because they were trying to qualify for the Olympics. This was their moment. And then I went and sat in the stands and I watched the competition. And I watched 80% of the athletes carry on doing exactly what they were doing before. I couldn't believe it. I'd given them all of this stuff. I'd given them the evidence to show why it worked. This was the recipe for gold medals. And they'd carried on doing what they were doing before. 20% of the athletes had pretty much adopted everything that we wanted. They were the ones that had helped with the experiments. So the penny drops. In my arrogance and ignorance, I'd completely missed the fact that these athletes and their coaches had given blood, sweat and tears over years to hone what they wanted to do the best they could. And then this young kid comes along at the last minute and slaps a spreadsheet on the table, gives them some stuff and walks off. So we battered back to Southampton. We cut a hole in the ceiling of the wind tunnel around about over there, put an overhead projector there. We created a little bit of a little program that would translate the newtons of force that we worked into whatever language they wanted. Time saved in the event, whatever it is they wanted to see, just time. And we just got all of the Olympic team down, one by one. That was Bradley Wiggins, that's Sir Chris Hoy. We put them in there and didn't say a word. We just let them see the data in front of them in their language that they chose live and let them experiment. Freeform time, we called it. And they watched the changes that they made and watched the impact on their event. So they could understand what the status quo was and what the consequences of each decision they made. And then they turned around and started to ask the experts for some questions, and they were on hand and they answered the questions. Then they started to ask for some advice. And the experts said, well, why don't you try this helmet? Why don't you try this piece of clothing? And it took about an hour and a half for each of the athletes to go through. And by the end of it, they'd adopted pretty much everything that we wanted. But the point was, now it was their choice, not our choice. What we'd created for them was a safe space, an emotionally safe space to explore different. And it was entirely up to them whether they did it or didn't do it. And that's really important because they would own the consequences. Good or bad, whatever it was, they owned the consequences. So the wind tunnel became more of a psychological tool, or at least as much a psychological tool as it was a scientific one. And the team went on, as I said, to be, actually, they were top 10. If you counted the medals, they were top 10 as a country in their own right. And it was a competitive advantage that they held until about 2020. It took 15 years or so before the rest of the world actually cottoned on and caught up to what was, outside of our world, pretty basic stuff. So while all this was going on, well, particularly in 2012, I found myself on Newsnight speaking to a wider audience, predominantly about the successes of the Olympics while it was going on, but also, as you'd expect, you know, it was one of those programs where you have to wear a tie, that wider questions about riding bikes sort of start to get fed in. And I was asked, well, why don't cyclists pay road tax? And well, I'm pretty sure that was abolished in 1936. But I started to realize through this round of media that I was doing that this tool can answer so many of the bigger problems that we have in society. You know, climate change, you've got pollution, you've got health, all of the big crises that we're facing. This simple tool could play a huge part in making those differences. So I sort of got sucked in sideways, using British cycling as a platform to advocating for more cycling. And I found it was just such a sturdy soapbox. I got really passionate about it and dangerously close to the world of politics. So the fact that we were just drowning in evidence really was starting to get really irritating. I mean, this is a famous street in Copenhagen, and that just a short way from our shores. This one is 200 miles from Westminster. 73% of kids are getting around under their own steam every day. Funnily enough, they've got half the obesity rate that we do. But more importantly than that, they have total independence, total equity. It doesn't matter, rich or poor, they can get around and have access to things. So I got really, really passionate about it because all of this was being ignored. Well, it wasn't being ignored everywhere. There were some changes. There's a picture that will stand the test of time. But Boris, I mean, of all the things you could say about Boris, there's a lot. he was the first person to commit £1 billion to change the streets to make this. I mean, he threw 1,000 darts, and most of them killed people, but one or two hit the bullseye, and this was one of them. And he made a massive difference. So I ended up being in that sphere and advocating and got quite close to it. And other people noticed because at the same time as all this was happening, Andy Burnham, the former Secretary of State for DCMS, had come out of national politics and taken on a role as the first Metro Mayor of Greater Manchester. 10 boroughs come together, and Andy had taken that role, and he had campaigned in his manifesto to get 10% more people riding bikes. And so he asked me if I would be his cycling and walking commissioner. Actually, he said cycling commissioner, and I said, actually, I want both. Active travel naturally goes together. I want both. So I thought, right, I'm not going to take this job immediately. I will phone up the person who performs that role for the Mayor of London and say, what do I need? What must be true for this to succeed? And he said, you must be speaking for him. This is his mission that you're delivering, not yours. Because to get change, it's got to be his. And you must have control of the cash, because that's the lever that you need. So I phoned Andy back up and said, Andy, this is your mission, and you've got to front it up. And we've got to have a dedicated budget that you give me some form of control over. Without hesitation, he said, yep. And then I thought, oh, shit. I've painted myself into a corner here that, all of this campaigning for several years, and then somebody said, well, go on then. And so I found myself in this job, whether I wanted it or not. And so I only had limited tools from my background, said in manufacturing and in a bit of sport. And I thought, okay, well, what do I always do? Well, you baseline. The first thing you do is work out, where am I now? And we did that for Greater Manchester. And we looked at, what does it cost us to do what we are doing now? And it was a pretty stark picture. 250 million car journeys every year in that region at less than 1 kilometre. They were paying £2.5 million a week treating inactivity alone. So whilst it was really uncomfortable, it was really important that the status quo was a conscious choice, not something we could talk about the other things, but we don't talk about the status quo. So it's really important to make the fact that how you travel now is costing £3.75 billion every year. And that gave the local leaders, who were very decent people, the motivation they needed to consider different, to at least consider doing things differently. So having got them to that position and got them interested, and Andy made his promise, his pledge of 10% of journeys, now we needed to work out, well, what do we need to do? So we needed a wind tunnel for councillors. We needed a safe space so they could explore different in a way that they could cope with it, with so many competing demands. It wasn't quite as sexy as the setup in Southampton. It simply consisted of the 10 council rooms. They chose who was in the room. In some cases, it was engineers, it was heads of highways, local leaders, cabinet members, members of the public, whoever they wanted in the room, 10 districts, and a blank map of their area. This one's Rochdale. And a packet of coloured pens. They held the pens. We owned the questions. So question number one was, for each of these audiences, 10 times, played out almost identically every time. Would you ride a bike outside your house? And they were sort of crossed arms because they could sense this. Is this a trick question? Would you ride a bike outside your house? Yes. Okay. Would you ride it to the local shop? No. Why not? Because at the end of my road, there's a canal or a railway, usually a busy road, some kind of barrier. What's on the other side? Would you ride there? Oh, that's so-and-so road. Yeah, I'd ride there. Okay. So what would you need to get across that barrier? What needs to be true? Well, there's got to be a crossing or a bridge, or just write that in. And we did that and said, actually, where in your area, where are all the shops? Where are the workplaces? Where are the schools? Where do people want to go? How would they want to get there? And so they started to scribble on a map. So very briefly, the red areas here are locked. You can't get in or out easily. And so it's not going to happen. So they're severed, areas of severance. The blue dots are where people want to go. And after an hour or so of scribbling on this map, they chose where they wanted to go and where they could do things. There's lots of crossing points, which is the green bits, some segregated lanes in the yellow, not many. Most of it was just getting barriers out of the way. We sat back and thought, this is doable. This is actually doable. So we went around each of the areas and did that. And then we asked each of the boroughs, can we take this as a rough draft and put it online and let anybody say anything they want? And to their credit, they said, okay, we'll do that. And we were all expecting quite a lot of abuse. So we put it online, and it was a 1,000-mile network plan, have your say. And within a few hours, we had 4,000 comments. And the biggest complaint we got was, where's our bit? Where's our bit? And people were really annoyed because they could see something's happening here, and I want to make sure I get my piece of it. So that fear of missing out compelled people who would normally not have an interest in this to get involved, and it swelled to a 1,800-mile network because the public were given the pen. We bolted 2 rules onto that, or rather we agreed 2 rules between us, that for infrastructure to work, it's got to be usable and want to be used by a 12-year-old, and their parents would let them. And everybody said, well, yeah, that makes sense, because if a 12-year-old could use it, so could somebody who's a bit frail, somebody who's got kids in tow. So if we're going to invest, we don't paint white lines on the road, it doesn't change behaviour. So everybody agreed that rule away from the heat of battle. And for walking, anything we invest in must be usable and want to be used by a parent with a double buggy. So not specifications and outcome that people valued, that wasn't about the activity, it was an outcome that they valued. So it ended up being, as I say, 1,800 miles, thousands of crossings, and it's being delivered as we speak. It was the largest network in the country. That fear of missing out. Also, people started to feel really good about it because they were seeing statements in the press that says the largest network plan in the country. Greater Manchester was doing something, they felt pretty good about it. And the B badge came along, it became known as the B network. So Andy's first term was up, we'd just come out of COVID, and he asked me if I would take on a bigger role. I had the chance to interfere on an even larger scale to become his transport commissioner, to stitch together trams, trains and buses to make a cohesive package. Excuse me. And all would have this B logo on. If you look at the B, you'll notice it's got little handlebars because that was its origin. So I had to ask myself, well, what must be true for people to want to get out of the car? So we went and asked them. We went and asked everybody, what would absolutely, for you, need to be true for you to consider getting out of the car? And we wrote it down. Simple statement that we wrote down, the things that must be true. And I think the key bits in there for me are people choose to use it, because ultimately that's got to happen. These are the things that you need for people to choose to use it. And its aim was to give people an attractive alternative to driving. So if I put transport that works for everybody up there, which is the same thing, you'd have probably just gone, not really objected, nothing to object to. It's the kind of statement we see an awful lot, but there would have been no emotional attachment or value in it for you. And that is so important, that what does success look like is clear. Because as soon as that gets difficult and we've got to start doing things like traffic control of some form, speed control, bus lanes in to make the buses work and become a really attractive option, support would probably crumble. So that value, the outcome, for me, needs to be visible. Because we've evolved over, go slightly sideways, to 10,000 years or more to think really short term, to think very tribally as well, and fear immediate loss a lot more than we feel it much more keenly than we feel possible long-term gain, especially for anything bigger than just our immediate clan. I mean, the best example I can give you is climate change. You know, the biggest threat in the world to all of us. Where does it fit in our priorities? It's quite a long way down. And that's just how we're built. So we have to take that into account rather than pretend that's not the case. So not conforming with your tribe, your family, your neighbors, your friends, your colleagues is dangerous, and it feels really uncomfortable. We try and avoid it. So being aligned with them is much more important than the greater good. So the tribe needs something that immediately and is obviously valuable, easier than now, and to consider it, the benefits have to be in a time frame that I understand. So something like, okay, integrated ticketing for this, so I can tap on any mode of transport, it's capped at the end of the day, and it'll happen in 3 years. Okay, I'm in. And we'll do a bit of difficult for that. And that's absolutely key. So the B network took hold because it ticks a lot of instinctive boxes, a lot of those things that need to be true, not because it's what society needs. And it's being delivered now, and it was a fascinating 5 years, but I wasn't Transport Commissioner for very long before the phone rang again, and I went on to my next chapter. So what had been happening in Greater Manchester had been noticed in number 10, and in late 21, the Prime Minister asked me to establish Active Travel England, a new agency in the Department for Transport to deliver his vision of 50% of journeys cycled or walked, all nicely set out in his gear change strategy. Now, at first glance, our job was to get 50% of more people cycling and walking, but it wasn't really. Our job is culture change, which became really evident when we had a change of Prime Minister soon after. We had a flyby from Liz Truss, and then we had Rishi Sunak, who, as soon as he took office, decided he did not like his party's policy on this after all and cut our budget by 2/3. So for the remainder of that government, it was really a case of not losing ground, which I would say that we succeeded in doing. Lots of stories behind that, which I'm afraid I'm not going to tell you. Maybe they'll come out in memoirs in a few years to come, but it was fascinating, knotty problems, one after another. We saw low traffic neighbourhoods painted as a source of evil. We saw official government statements warning of the danger of 15-minute cities, the danger of being able to walk to your shops, and a bit like you've got right outside here. A whole set of stories that I can't tell you. But regardless of the mood music changing, those two statements at the bottom remain absolutely true if we want change. If we're to succeed, we have to stop leading with logic and start connecting directly to those very base instincts, because that's what other people are doing. Or more precisely, we need to start leveraging them. So I think so far I've stayed on pretty safe ground this evening. And I've talked about things that are fairly well known. I want to really look now a bit of exploratory stuff, looking at ideas on how we might tackle those things, how we might make some change. I'll be really interested to see how you feel about that. Whilst I'm going to stick with my current area of transport, I'd also posit that what's true for me now, what counsellors needed, the same thing as athletes, that if we're going to change travel, I think it's the same things that we have to do to get any human being to change from things that they're doing now. The catalyst for this talk was actually some work we commissioned just last year when we engaged an agency to examine all of the things that we were doing and saying to see how effective we were. So they gathered some focus groups together from all walks of life, and we just threw everything at them that we were saying now. So one of the early ones, our straplines, was putting the joy back into journeys. And I thought, oh, it's quite nice bit of alliteration there. Hated it. Absolutely hated it. Meant nothing to me. They just joys, journeys? No. This one I just happened to have with me. Happier, healthier, greener. No, not interested whatsoever. Active travel itself. We just got used to the term. It's an industry parlance. Don't really know what that means. And that was, just didn't know what it meant. And I thought, this is a good one. 50% of journeys, cycled or walked, gets 128 billion back for our economy for the investment. Absolutely amazing. Not only did they not like that, it got them angry. They said, I don't know what that number means. I don't actually believe you, and you're pissing me off now because I'm trying to pay my mortgage. And this was quite a revelation for us. And then towards the end of the focus groups, we said, we want to give your children transport independence and the freedom to stay at after-school clubs. Bingo. They all leaned in and started to electively tell us what they would give up to have that outcome. Because now we were talking about something that they really cared about. It also correlated with some of the findings and bits and pieces that we'd seen out there. So I don't know if you've got any bike buses around here. There's some spattered around the country. There's an amazing one in Glasgow where some hardy parents just say, right, we're going to get all the kids together, we're going to ride to school. And you see it just inspirational to see. And the kids, they'll pick them up en route and it ends up a massive gang taking up all the road space and going really slow. And people will bend their behaviour for that. And it's okay. Even if they're slightly frustrated, they'll let it go because that's something I care about instinctively, even if I'm not actually a parent, and it connects with people. We could see this in several bits of evidence that we were looking at around the world. School streets is another one. They're popping up everywhere where you close off the traffic just for the pick-up and drop-off points. Really quite, not noiseless, but the noise goes right down around those because it affects us right to our core. So the reason we did that work last year is because in my transporty world, a lot of the things that we needed to get the job done, people have been taught to hate over the last few years. LTN, low traffic neighborhood. So definitely in industry and local politics, if you say that word, there's a sharp intake of breath now for having less traffic around homes, which is incredible. 10 billion more miles been driven around homes now than there were just 10 years ago. 20-mile-an-hour zones, when Wales decided to do that in residential areas to run up to the election, it was very effectively weaponised. And it worked really well. So anything that threatens the status quo or could be framed as an attack on potential voters was leveraged to win votes. And then as a consequence, even the possibility of standing next to anything that could be used against me, there was just very little motivation for it. So this is where I get to the experimental bit, really. How could we have approached those topics, or how could we approach them in the future to make them hard to emotionally hijack? Well, 20-mile-an-hour zones, the reason I picked on this one to start is that we know that they reduce accidents by a known amount, about 20–25%. And the observed effect of that, apart from less dead and crippled people, which you think would be enough, is car insurance drops. So imagine if that's what we'd actually led with. Imagine if Wales had said, we are going to drop the car insurance of everybody in this country. Now everybody's really interested, and then you start to talk about how we're going to do it. But something that connects the audience that you want to speak to. Low traffic neighbourhoods, LTL, that acronym that people have been taught to hate. What if they were called what they actually do? Child safe zones. And you don't allow it to be reduced to an acronym that I have no emotional connection with. It is a child safe zone. I wonder how people would feel about it if we started to talk about it in those terms. I mean, even active travel itself, what is the outcome of it? It's cheap or free travel. Who's going to say no to that? The overall point that I mentioned earlier, independence for our youngsters. Does anybody know what the age of independence is, transport independence is in Finland? 7. You can travel outside your home alone at 7. At 8, you can cross a major junction. At 10, you get the bus. In Germany, I think it's 10. So imagine if that is what we said that we were trying to achieve, to give children transport independence, and we didn't allow it to be framed or to be discussed in any other ways than that. We didn't allow acronyms to come in and get hijacked. I mentioned 50%. I'm near the end now, by the way, Julie. I'm just, in case you're watching the clock. 50%. I asked the team at Active Travelling, what does that actually mean? And they went, ooh. And they went away and they came back 2 days later and they said, it's 5.5 million more people active. I went, oh, that's quite good. What does that mean? And they went, oh. And they went away and they came back 2 weeks later and they said, it's actually 4 million fewer sick days. And I thought, well, public, not really that bothered. But now the Treasury is interested because now this is growth. This is about the economy. It's 2 million fewer GP visits every year. So public, still not desperately interested. Wes Streeting promised 3 million extra GP visits, so he's really interested. So following that train, I thought, well, what about me? What does those numbers do for me? What have we started to look at? How would it reduce my wait at a GP or for a GP's appointment, me personally? Now those numbers mean something to me. What could the reduction be in health insurance if that was linked in some way? And if I don't feel the need to have to drive the kids to school, I feel able to let them go, how much time do I get back every day, every week, every year? How much time have I got back? What have we expressed these outcomes in those figures? How much fuel have I saved each year? And what might I do with the money that could have been spent on that? So this is not, it isn't spin, it's a different way to describe the evidence so more people can relate to it. Because we need to get an awful lot better at it for some of our biggest challenges, societal health, for pollution, cost of living, climate change. And I think if we're going to tackle the really big things, we've got to make it personal. That is what I believe has to be true. We won't do difficult things just because it's logical. We will do difficult things for love, to protect our families. We will push for change if we believe we're missing out on something. And we will change course that makes us feel good, even if it's a hard thing to do. Facts and data are foundational, so they are essential to build anything meaningful. But no one buys a house because it's got great foundations. We buy houses because of the opportunities that they promise, of how they make us feel. So tackling how we feel is how we align our instincts and our intellect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. That was absolutely brilliant, both the sort of historical elements of the things that you did there and that lean into the psychology and how do you get people to want things, not just saying, look, I've got a spreadsheet, everybody should go cycling, everybody should go walking. How do we really think deeper about the motivations? And I think there's a huge amount there to pick up on. We do have time for questions, so if you're in the room, if you can just put your hand up, I'll try to get one of the microphones to you. We do have them upstairs in the gods. This is Jesus, so we're allowed to have gods up there. If you're online, please do use the Q&A feature. Who wants to start us off? Right in the front row there.
I thought we were going to get to go to the bar then, but never mind.
We can go to the bar afterwards. But yeah.
Is there any early data or good data about how many more people are cycling in Greater Manchester?
There is actually. So first of all, it takes a little while to get mobilised because the bit that we don't see behind the scenes is who's going to design this stuff. Then you've got to design it, and then you've got to consult on it. And so there's a lot involved further than just the cash and the rules. So there's a lot, and sometimes land purchase. So it takes about 5 years, which they found in London, takes about 5 years to get mobilised for things to really start to, enough of it to create a difference. So just a few weeks ago, they had some data out that there are 12% fewer car journeys now and 10% more walking trips. So it has started. And it's messy, and there's still lots of issues, pavement parking, it really isn't. There's some grim bits, but they've now got enough sticking together that is allowing the change to happen.
Any other questions in the room? I'll take, yeah.
I've done a couple of summer internships in roads and highways Do you have any advice on getting kind of your voice heard higher up in order to make change?
Getting what, sorry?
Your voice heard kind of higher up in the company.
Wow. Well, I like people who come with solutions. Look at my world and go, here's some possible solutions. I mean, I think that's really helpful. So just keep having ideas, really. And the evidence bit is important. I'm not dissing data because I absolutely love it, but we lead with it when really it needs to go, this is how change can happen in ways that you understand and value, and it's supported to show that you're safe, certainly in the transport world, which is extremely conservative. But come with solutions, I think, is probably the key.
Can I bring in a couple of questions from online? I'll join them together. So Brian Naar says, the Netherlands are building Fietsnelweg. I'm sure my pronunciation is awful.
What, sorry?
Fietsnelweg. Thank you. Cycle motorways, always ask the audience. And they're really good. Why is the UK not doing this? And related to that is a question from John Morris. Why are we light years behind Holland, Denmark, Belgium and other European countries in getting political support for active travel? How have they got this right?
I think, well, they did some really brave. I mean, you can come at this. There's a diagram in here somewhere for a political will, cost, time sort of ratio. So in Holland in the 60s, they for child deaths on the street, but probably more because of an oil crisis, if we're brutally honest about it. Two things came together, and they decided to change the way that they would fund transport. So they created a road user hierarchy, and they funded and legislated accordingly. That took a lot of political will. It's a very strong thing to do, and it took 50 years to get the change. So I think that's one way to do it. I've seen it done regionally, where Ghent is my favourite example of where they changed the whole city in one weekend for €6 million, which is a little bit melodramatic, to be honest. They consulted for 2 years and did it in one weekend, but they just stopped traffic going through, made it all go around, told everyone they were going to do it, and so they got almost instant reaction to that. It was easier to get in and out of the city on a bike and public transport. So you've either got to have you've got to have political will, or it takes a long time and it's really expensive. And at the moment, the status quo in this country is very well mobilised to protect itself. And so we are up against that, which is a political threat. I think one of the things ways it will change in this country is devolution. So the regional mayors who I'm working with closely, they're really up for this because they've got similar stats to Greater Manchester had, and that's their problems that they're paying for, and they want that change. And so when they come together as a voice and say to the Secretary of State, we want to do this, will you back us? Secretary of State can go, oh, you're doing it, I'm helping them. So political alignment, and this is devolution in action, which is our agenda. So that's the way I think the stars could align in the UK.
Any questions back?
Oh, the larger motorway ones.
Oh, yes.
I think that's part of that, really. And let's do the little local journeys, which is 2/3 of our journeys are less than 5 miles. So that's the bit that I think we need to focus on first.
Yes, over here. Just to be clear, women are also allowed to ask questions.
One of the problems that I see very often in Cambridge is that the buses get stuck in traffic really badly, and that means that they're unreliable and people won't use them. There was a congestion charge proposed to try and relieve the traffic, and it became really unpopular. And I wondered if you had followed that at all, and if there was one thing you would have suggested that people or politicians in Cambridge should have done differently to have improved its chances.
I think this is largely, it is not about the bus, but what does the bus give you? And that's the messaging we need to lead on. I think social science, I mean, I've been walking around the last 24 hours in Cambridge, and obviously the sun's out, so everything is best. Everybody's, loads of people on the streets. Your traffic mix, I think you're about 25%, I think, active travel. Cycling particularly, actually. So it's really high, and you think, that'd do for a country. That'll do. I'll take that as success. That 50% target already done here. So I'm looking around thinking, first of all, I'm observing there's really little infrastructure. There's not much infrastructure at all, but it's still happening. I know you've got the background of the colleges, and it's about, what, third of the population, thereabouts? A big chunk. of people who've got no money and want to get around. so you know, that's a big driver. And it's encouraged by the colleges, no car ownership. So you've got some things other university places have got. But I'm looking around of what, if you brought anyone from another part of the country and said, do you fancy this? I don't think you're going to get many that go there. I know I haven't quite got to your question yet. But the point is, you have to lead with that feeling of, wow, this is great, I want this, what do I need to do? Where we tend to start talking with, this is what we need to do, and people sense the threat, and then they're up in arms. So there was a document produced 2022 called Bus Back Better, which most people probably will not have read, but the bus policy. But why it was a really good policy was not the funding for buses, because you'll just have a big yellow traffic jam. It was, if you want the funding for buses, you must make the space for the buses. You actually got to give them dedicated space so this investment is able to work, and that's absolutely key. But you're coming down to that political will, and the way to have political will is to have something that you really want to stand up for. So that could be giving people who need it most transport freedom, you know, access to opportunities to work. Nobody should be left behind. You know, I would be starting with that. I think that's we've done. I mean, I put down, what did I put? Happier, healthier, greener. It's almost there, but it doesn't connect. You've got to be personal, I think.
There was a question on the top, but just before we do, a question from Kathy online. Great points. How can the planning system be made more engaging and easy to use? If more people get involved in shaping how their places and spaces look, surely it would help the sense of ownership.
Yeah, I think the planning system, and I'm only thinking out loud here, so both of the agencies that I am chair of, so Sport England and Active Travelling, they're both statutory consultees. So one has to be consulted for all your green spaces, the other has to, any development over 150 houses, Active Travel England gives advice, and it's pretty, that advice is, it means something to developers and local councils if you say, we don't approve of this and here's why. Both of those are under threat at the moment in the review of statutory consultees to make house building easier. But I'm not going to go there. I think that is an instrument, but if you follow that what must be true thing, it is, first of all, people have got to want a thing, and what would need to be true for them to want it. I've got to see value for me, and what would, and to follow that logic, it's got to come to be personal, because the planning system needs to follow what people want, and it doesn't at the moment. There's quite a lot of wiring in the system that the things like how we appraise and value stuff isn't aligned with all of the policy outcomes that we've actually said that we want. So changing that wiring would make quite a big difference.
Question right at the top.
Yeah. It's actually building on the last question. I think a lot of the situations where you find yourself, they are systems in play that are either positive or negative against the thing you're trying to achieve. And this idea of asking what needs to be true is a really nice way of kind of cutting to the middle of that. I'm wondering if there's any techniques you've used to actually to expand first. So when you looked at the Manchester ideas that you had, you saw there were health possibilities and there were pollution possibilities. You know, you're looking at other systems outside. Can we get people from A to B on a bike? I'm just wondering, what techniques do you use to start to explore those and uncover them? Are there things that you've found have been useful techniques? So
I would posit the same principle applies wherever you're standing. So if you're in a system that's not working, who's immediately around you? What would they need? What's the motivation for them to do or not do a thing? Just to double back to Greater Manchester that you met, the leaders saw something they did, the status quo they didn't like, and options to do it, and enough public support to get stuck in. The bit that I've missed is the political cycle. So that emotional, I'm in, I get it, and then I feel good about owning this. And then there's political churn, and the next person who comes in who's just got digging up the road and everybody's shouting at me and I didn't do this. So what I've missed is you don't need to do it once, you need to do it 10 times, which isn't specifically the question that you were asking. But I think you've got to ask what's in it for this individual. So I'm trying to give you some closer examples. They're quite fairly big politics. So Mark Harper was Secretary of State for Transport. He was my boss for a while, and the first meeting with him was this as well. And he thought I was going to lobby him, and I said, well, I don't want to get any more people cycling and walking. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, we're about choice. We're about creating more choice. And he went, oh, we're conservatives. We like choice, don't we? Yeah, choice. And so we found a common ground, a way to talk about things that the way that he could get it. Right now, the amount of noise and lack of cash, we're thinking, well, let's talk about schools. What if we did 1,000 schools, which is not a lot actually in the great scheme of things, to give those children transport independence? And if the mayors want to do that, the Secretary of State's going, oh yeah, I'll back them to do that. Then it comes together and you've got a foothold. So it's finding that what's the motivation for each individual if you want change? Not the system, not the logic of it. Who's in the way? What's their motivation?
Just on that topic, can I just bring in a question from Ivan Henschel? Would changing the formality of typical school uniforms, actually work formality as well, make a big difference to appeal of active travel?
I think that's
Would it make
my sphere. I think that's a little bit outside of my sphere. It's not something I've considered. I think, I'll be going way off piste, I think. But school uniforms are a double-edged sword. If you came from a family with not much money, then you don't stand out if you're all in a school uniform. They have a value. I'm assuming that means in terms of getting sweaty or something. I don't know. I think loads of people around here ride round in normal clothes and it works out. And I think Holland gets on okay as well. So I don't think it's one of our top 10 fires, that one.
That's it. Up at the top there.
Hi. Please, can I loop back around to the very beginning and ask, are you involved in British cycling anymore?
No.
Oh.
No. I mean, they've had policy changes of their own. So British Cycling gave me a platform that was, saw me end up here. I'm not quite sure where to thank them or curse them, but it was an amazing period. And their membership actually went up a lot, and they survey their membership an awful lot. And number one, why do you join this organisation? Number one was insurance. Everybody wanted insurance. You can get insurance anywhere. Number two was somebody who speaks for me. And they wanted that advocacy. The membership wanted that advocacy. Winning gold medals was actually number 6. But still, the instinct is to, yeah, but we've got to win loads of medals. So that's become a focus. The sport, I mean, sport is wonderful. I know that's why I'm chair of Sport England. It is an amazing thing. But in terms of British cycling, I think there's such an opportunity there because you can't have a race if you don't have any road space. so there should be synergy. So they're doing a little bit at the moment, but their focus is pretty much on competition. There's organisations like Living Streets and Bikeability who have really stepped into the policy space, Sustrans as ever, that are doing that. But I think I feel it's a bit sad for British cycling that they're no longer one of the big voices.
There's a question at the back here. I've seen a couple of others.
Hey, Chris. Question to do with sport, so away from transportation.
My least knowledgeable topic, but I'll have a crack.
It's obesity. It's and using opponent sports to tackle obesity, so getting people involved in tennis, hockey, all this. Now, in everyday life, most of the things we use are invented in this century, but when you go back to opponent sports, most of them were invented in the 19th century or even the 18th or 19th century. Has anybody asked, is this the problem? That the reason that people are not participating in opponent sports as much as possible is what we're presenting them was designed 100, 200 years ago, a lot of it by men, not for the point of tackling obesity. And my question is really, is that question ever been asked at a very high level?
Well, I don't know is the direct answer. I mean, I think there's a wrestling for sports, purpose of sport, what is the value of sport? That's changing rapidly, isn't it? And I think you've got to, so first of all, there's a lot of, with that history comes a brand, and you change your brand at your peril. So the Olympics is experimented with breakdancing and other things. And I think it's missing the mark a little bit. Things like climbing, that's really interesting. So we've got to evolve and change, and we've got to look at the audience. Depends what outcome you want. I don't think sport is to tackle obesity. It's one of the things that it can do. There's 150,000 grassroots sports club in the country with 9 million members. Their biggest value is social interaction and a reason to gather and it brings people in for those reasons. So the value of sport to me is immense. Sport England spends about 320 million a year, gives out. Only 100 million is actually on sport. 200 million is on activity to tackle health. Now that's quite a big political question at the moment, is how far do you go with activity? Is gardening Sport England? We're on the edge of that at the moment. So what is the purpose? So sport, I think, is part of a big culture change, and your competition is not other sports, it's online. We spent 2 years during COVID training our kids to sit still and watch screens, and it's quite hard to get back out of that. Some of the exciting stuff is they are now seeking out opportunities to be together, social things, and so they are choosing different. I mean, a really wild parallel, but you remember when videos came out as the death of the cinema, and they really shrank, and then people went, you know what, I want to go out, and I don't really want to have to talk to you, so should we go to the cinema? so they found a new purpose. So sport's got to change its shape to survive, and not all sports will. And I think in terms of tackling obesity, it has a part to play, but not the biggest part. So tackling how people move around every day, that's, build it back into streets is where you'll get your biggest bang for your buck. I have no idea whether that got close to answering your question. Perhaps it did, but...
So there's a question up at the top there, and another one at the top, and there's one over here.
Yeah, hello. I spent the last 11 years taking my daughter to netball matches. And what was fascinating was when we drove to every match, most Saturday mornings, particularly down in Broxbourne, the traffic was just unbelievable. Like, when you talk about car journeys, at no point did anyone ever say, can we share cars? And I'm just wondering, in terms of, when I was a kid growing up, we used to walk or cycle to football matches and go on the pitch and then go home. To this, I think with kids today, or I think maybe it's a parenting as well, is there anything been done maybe in Manchester with sports clubs to get people to share journeys? Because, I mean, if you want to see something, go down to Broxbourne Park on a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, cycle, because if you go in a car, you'll be stuffed for 2 hours, basically. So just anything on the getting to matches.
That's a really good point. Your last bit is that I don't want to be stuck for 2 hours, therefore I will change. So in terms of the active travel bit, it's got to be easy, it's got to be safe. Both of those things must be true, or it's not happening. And of course, with the car use thing, same with school runs in the morning, it becomes a self-fulfilling problem that it's not safe enough, we'll go in the car, there's too many cars, it's not safe, so on and so forth. So breaking that cycle is really hard. To speak to your lift sharing bit, Sport England last year, we produced an every move strategy, our first environmental strategy. We backed it with 45 million of funding for the smallest of organisations and groups, as well as the large national governing bodies. And in 2027, it will be a condition of funding for any government money to have a credible sustainability strategy. That might be really small stuff, like lift sharing for some groups. It'd probably be bigger for the national governing bodies who've got, but we made it a condition of funding. So we've created motivation, we've created funds, and we've given a date that is not so close that it's just untenable, not too far away that it's not meaningful. And lift sharing is quite a biggie. I think football is the sport I'd really like to see get involved. It's by far the biggest sport in the country. Imagine if you just got one big player to say, I'm not going to stop flying, but when I'm in Europe, I'm going to get the train. Who's with me? Can you imagine the impact that would have? So sport can do an awful lot to lead change in health, in climate change, because of its scale, and it's embedded emotionally in every community. But football is one I'd be delighted if there was a big star who decided to take a stand.
I'll take another question up at the top there.
Hello. Thank you very much for that talk, by the way.
Thank you.
Thinking about the wind tunnel example, I think that felt like a tipping point in terms of getting the athletes to make a change, because I feel like it brings together that sense of the instinct to be better as an athlete, the incentive to win, but then based in the sort of like the bodily intellect to actually improve by using these new materials. You used the example of the map as a way to get the boroughs or the districts to think about how to, as a wind tunnel example, for them to think about active travel within the Greater Manchester area. I guess my question to you is, how can we improve examples or quasi-wind tunnels for public members or members of the public to think about the instinct to be part of a community, incentivized to be better, and in a way make that change of improving our sort of livelihoods and outcomes?
Well, I think, I mean, as we discussed earlier, that you're dead right that it's got to be personal. It's got, why would I want to change? Why would I want to get involved in something that's so big? What's in it for me? We have to be able to answer that question. So in terms of involving the public, in Greater Manchester, we went, here it is online, say whatever you want. But that was also an opportunity for the people who were already involved to go and encourage people to come in. And it was a bit of a curiosity. So people went, oh, we'll have a look at my place on this map. Hang on, we haven't got anything. Then they want to write a comment. And so that open question is really helpful for people. But I think from a council perspective, you've got to ask the right question. I mean, if I'd gone back to that time now, I would have headlined it. We want to give every child in Greater Manchester transport independence. Have your say. And I think then people are looking at it for a wholly different reason. If back then we almost certainly said cycling and walking, and there'll be a lot of people who go, yeah, cycling, that's the thing I hate. I don't like that, or that's not me. So we need to evolve to make it personal, and also the ability to win. So that consultation online, people felt, A, they could physically write or put a line on a map, a dot on a map, so they felt like they were doing something that didn't cost them much. You know, it cost them a little tiny bit of time, which was important. The cost-return ratio was right. And then together, that made a difference. So it's probably something around that, really. Make the steps for the individual possible. If you say go out and campaign, there's an awful lot, you know, involved in my time to go and do that. What's in it for me? So yeah, I think it's got to be personal, and it's got to be proportionately easy.
I should mention we ran an event here a couple of weeks ago with the Cambridge Room, which is trying to do some of the similar sorts of engagements. I know there are a couple of people here at that who might want to talk to you later. There's a question over here, and then I think there's one more online, and then I think might stop to let Chris sample some of our local beer. Oh, sorry, is there? And one more to finish off. Yeah.
You sounded moderately disappointed there.
No, I'm not disappointed at all there.
So I think locally, for a cyclist, potholes are by far the biggest problem. So I don't know, do you see there's conflict there? Build a cycle lane or fix the roads?
I mean, the council's finances, having worked in one and then watched us come out of COVID and go, we've got nothing, and then go straight into a massive financial crisis, you know, there's just nothing. So there is no easy choices now. There's no even moderately difficult choices. They're all horrendous. I think investment should, I mentioned the wiring earlier. So I think we should go, right, what do I want to achieve? What are my biggest problems? Change our appraisal mechanism for what we spend on that lines up with those things. So you'll probably be a lot of pothole fixing, but not everywhere. You know, I think maintaining what we've got is really important. I think long and hard, if I was in Treasury, I think long and hard before expanding. I think maintaining what we've got is first. But you know, it's not one I've got an answer for. You know, which one moves most traffic?
Mm-hmm. Quick question from Martin Willits online. How would a small cycling advocacy group find out the potential reduction in car insurance from making a road into a no-through route? Who could they ask?
Don't know. Don't know is the answer. But I think it would be, it's probably at my level to engage insurance companies and start to explore, and to go and look at the Welsh government, go and look at other parts of the countries where measures have been taken and look what happened, so we could start to estimate what would happen. So Wales at the moment is like the biggest example. That's settled right down now. People are quite happy with virtually all the 20-mile-an-hour zones. Go and look at what's actually happened and then use that to be able to extrapolate this is what could be true here.
And then the final question over there.
Thank you. It strikes me that we spend a lot of money, hopefully successfully, in building new infrastructure for pedestrians and for cyclists. Do we really take into account the variety of different bicycles that are around and the purpose? So, you know, you have your very fast cyclists, you have your people pottering to school, you have the cargo bikes. We now have in Cambridge hundreds of e-bikes who seem to be able to drive everywhere. And I just wonder whether the infrastructure that we're building is for today's vehicles and transportation, or whether we're taking adequate concern for the future or for maintenance of that infrastructure to enable what is the ideal mix. And do you have any views on any of those?
I think in terms of the ideal mix, I mean, when we build a road, we build it for fast, long journeys, local journeys, and we don't ask people what they're doing. We just make this space available, and we have a set of rules for you to apply for how you want to use it. Is up to you. Why are you making that journey? I know when I worked in the Northwest, we were counting journeys, people travelling for work, for cyclists. We were doing how many people are travelling to work, but with cars, we just counted them all. We didn't ask anybody where they're going. So I think we need to make space for people to do with what they will. But I think there's some work to be done on enforcement and behaviour on the road. I mean, I got asked by somebody the other day about what do we do about lycra louts. Somebody quite high up in government. And I thought, well, my mother was crushed to death on the roads by a driver who was texting. And that day, 4 more people were killed. And the day after that, 4 more people were killed, and so on and so forth. 99.8% of people are involved in an accident do so with a motor vehicle. So is that the right question? You know, is that where we should be spending our time? That said, people who are riding illegal e-bikes, well, they're not e-bikes actually, they're e-motorbikes because they've been chipped, and people riding through parks and close to people, that intimidation has a real effect. Even though there's not a collision, there is an effect. It changes people's behaviours. I'm not going down there. I'm going to get in the car rather than the bus because. So the behaviour bit, I think we really need to tackle. And we're not on top of it. E-bikes in particular are an amazing thing that they're so popular. At last, they've caught up with Europe. They are opening up cycling to people who wouldn't. It becomes now, it's not a worry about a hill or a headwind, but it's also going so quickly when our regulation is not keeping up. So there's a big enforcement culture around this new mix that I think we need to work on.
Chris, thank you so very, very much for everything you said, the presentation, the answers, all the work you're doing, and the ideas I think people continue to percolate on. So thank you very, very much for being here with us.
Thanks for having us.